But what it is, it's an otherworldly technology. It's so groundbreaking, this gene editing technology. It's already started to transform biology and medicine. And I'm utterly convinced it will be the biggest scientific earthquake imaginable. I'm just convinced of it. And that's why I want this year to be the year that I really get under the hood of it. And I'm going to tell you why I'm so sure it's going to be one of those technologies that is parallel or analogous to AI, which is clearly there to disrupt so many things. Well, just as one data point, as of today, in January 2025, there's 425 companies worldwide engaged in the development and application of CRISPR vectors. There are 425 companies giving this emerging technology a real shot. I mean, they're spending billions of dollars on doing something with such complexity.
This episode of the pod is proudly sponsored by Cadiz Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker CDZI. Cadiz is a transformative water resource company that is making a significant impact with its $5 billion in water assets and $173 million in cash. The company is currently constructing a massive water pipeline, the largest in the Southwest, which is designed to ensure reliable water access for the region. Cadiz is actively combating the water crisis with game-changing infrastructure projects and strategic partnerships. Under the leadership of visionary CEO Susan Kennedy, who previously served as Chief of Staff to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Cadiz is set to provide innovative solutions and substantial value to both its shareholders and the communities it serves. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. The information provided here is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Emmet, Anne-Marie, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy returns. Did you all have a nice break?
Oh my God. I had the wildest Christmas and New Year's Eve. I actually can't even tell you any details.
And Anne-Marie, where are you at the moment?
Oh, I'm back home in Colorado. Even though the backdrop looks the same, I actually brought the white wall with me. I just felt it was important to honor our listeners with consistency.
Yeah, that was very good of you. Was that extra? Was that extra for baggage?
Oh, it was. Erling is that was 2 to 3 check bags worth of expense trying to get in the wall on,
Okay.
Hold on. What did you get for Christmas? Okay, folks, listen, it's only fair to tell you we are actually recording this a little bit before you're hearing it. We're not going to tell you when, but it was certainly recorded after our last live episode, but a little bit before you're hearing it.
Yeah.
Hence the joke.
Yeah, hence this awful inside joke that only 3 of us are going to understand. But
that happens on the Graham Norton show as well, on the New Year's Eve show, where Graham would go, Happy New Year. And sometimes one or two of the guests look like, what? And then Graham has to give them the big wink. And then it's the annual joke that they do in the show.
Yeah. And I loved when Jennifer Lawrence was on for the New Year's show. And she turned to him, she goes, do people think this is how I want to spend my New Year's Eve?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So anyway, Happy New Year, everybody.
New Year.
We don't really know what we got for Christmas, so we can't have that conversation.
We don't really know what the market did over the last couple of week and a bit. So if there's been a major correction in between, you'll forgive us for not mentioning it at all.
Hopefully we have the foresight if there is some kind of major incident that we just don't publish this, that we just hold the episode rather than being like, be fine.
We're gonna have some fudge numbers as well. They're gonna be about 10%, 20%, whatever else. But so for the sake of the episode, we're just basically kind of previewing the year ahead. So we do this kind of every year. Whatever trends we foresee, whatever companies we want to look at, or just in general the kind of story we're most focused on. So each of us have kind of brought something to the table. But I wanted to preface it, and this, unless something major has happened, this will still be accurate by the time this episode goes out. But just a stat. So since 1950, there have been 8 times the S&P 500 has gained 20% or more 2 years in a row, which should have happened in 2023 and 2024. In 6 of those 8 times, the third year saw positive gains with an overall average and median return of 12 and 13% respectively. So I suppose, Emmet, you've got the most experience when it comes to seeing these kind of I'm not sure how to describe it perfectly, but like the emotional state of the market, and it does feel very heady right now. Like my immediate reaction is, to be a bit concerned about how good things have been, but the stats maybe don't back that as much as I feel it.
Yeah, do you know what springs to mind? At Horizon Live last year, you'll recall Bill Mann, when he was on stage, said that President-elect President Trump is going to, like, there is no person, there's virtually no one in America who cares more about a scoreboard. So whether, he wants to be the wealthiest, the most powerful, the best at golf, but for him, the ultimate scoreboard is the S&P 500. And the ultimate, it's possibly the scoreboard of his presidency. So it stands to reason that the actions he's going to take and the promises he's made are to support businesses. So I think that message or that feeling has permeated the market to quite an extent. So you can't ignore that we're going into a new presidential year, and that usually in that first year of a new president, albeit a former president's second term, but only the second time was separated by another president, we will have a dynamic there that we're not entirely used to. But to your point, yeah, the market is frothy and multiples are high. And we spoke about it in our last recorded episode in middle December. And I think that I think we're in for a good year. I'm feeling optimistic about the year ahead. I think the S&P, I read a report yesterday about what are all the analysts' opinions about how the S&P 500 is going to go in 2025. And as we record, here's a small clue to our listeners. The S&P is 6,035 points. And there's reports that it's going to hit as much as 7,500 in the year, which was the most optimistic one I read. I can't quite recall if it was UBS. There was a couple of analysts who thought it's going to hit 7,000 in the year ahead. But the vast majority of research houses looking at the S&P 500 with a track history of trying to predict anyway, see it as an up year. So look, you're safe in always saying it's going to be an up year, because 2 out of every 3 years over the last 100 years have been up years. So, the safer bet to say it's going to be an up year. So I'm feeling optimistic, most especially not because there's a new president, not because of what happened in the last 2 years, but because we are looking at some genuine breakthrough technologies and advancements that feel like, as we discussed in previous episodes, the internet in the 1990s.
And I think that's a good setup. So you may as well take the lead with your story for 2025 now, because you've put it on a tee for yourself after that.
Right. Okay. Well, at the end of last year, I quoted Bill Gates, who, in a wider point relating to AI, said that gene editing, DNA synthesis, and other advances in biotechnology are racing forward in parallel. Well, as much as AI is about to radically disrupt more or less everything, when you combine its capabilities with CRISPR, we're on the brink of everything changing, literally everything on Earth. Now, I'm going to have to build this point out, because the magnitude of this technology, or the potential of this technology, is truly seismic. And again, to quote my pal, Billy G of Microsoft founding fame, these changes are building like a wave far out at sea, invisible to many, but gathering force. And that's what he said in that blog post. So there must be 1,000,001 ailments that you can be born with, or you can catch, or you can develop in the course of your life. And the only thing they all have in common is a genetic component, whether it's a predisposition to a heart disease, risk of diabetes, a rare genetic disorder such as cystic fibrosis, or a genetic element of an actual virus. When you go into the virus, it's literally a cluster of DNA. DNA shapes all living things, and therefore our health, and the health of plants, and the health of animals. So in 2025, I'm really going to develop my own personal understanding and very limited expertise on CRISPR. Mike, about 2 or 3 years ago on the podcast, actually probably wasn't 2 or 3 years ago. I always say that as a holding pattern for something that happened in the past. But I don't know, that's a previous podcast episode. You asked me if I could remember what CRISPR stood for. Do you remember that?
That's a mile ago. No, I don't.
Yeah,
Go
it
on.
was. Okay. Well, I mostly got it. But I'm a bit further down the path now. So let me talk about CRISPR for a moment because,
I'd love if you brought this up and didn't know it.
well, there's a risk because this is complex stuff. Did you ever study or read something and you fully get it, and then it's so complex, a couple of days later, it starts to blur again in your mind? You should go
Yeah.
study physics, by
I
the
was about to
way.
say, I think your background suits that more than me.
uh, or has proven doesn't suit me at all. But so CRISPR, it's worth our listeners just getting a reminder because for me, it's one of these technologies that I hear about it, I get the headlines, but then the finer detail starts to blur after a while. What CRISPR stands for, and you really only need to hear this once: clustered, regularly interspaced, short, palindromic repeats. So if there's ever anything that's forgettable, it's that. So what I would say, it's a bit like laser. When you hear the word laser, no one thinks it's light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. It's like whatever, it's a laser. CRISPR is CRISPR. So just don't even give it a second thought. But it's irrelevant. But what it is, it's an otherworldly technology. It's so groundbreaking, this gene editing technology. It's already started to transform biology and medicine, and I'm utterly convinced it will be the biggest scientific earthquake imaginable. I'm just convinced of it. And that's why I want this year to be the year that I really get under the hood of it. And I'm going to tell you why I'm so sure it's going to be one of those technologies that is parallel or analogous to AI, which is clearly there to disrupt so many things. Well, just as one data point, as of today, in January 2025, there's 425 companies worldwide engaged in the development and application of CRISPR vectors. There are 425 companies giving this emerging technology a real shot. I mean, they're spending billions of dollars on doing something with such complexity. But I'm going to go back, and explain to people in as simple a term as possible what it is and how it works. Because really, that's kind of the only way you can put your head around something as truly breakthrough as this, is to have a rough idea how it works. So it's a breakthrough technology that was originally discovered as part of a bacteria's immune system. So CRISPR helps microbes defend against viruses by targeting and cutting their DNA. Okay, so it's a natural mechanism that scientists have discovered. So if you were to get a bacteria under a microscope and go in, the bacteria has its own little immune system which allows it to stay safe. And this natural mechanism that was discovered has allowed scientists to replicate, to edit genes in other organisms with unparalleled precision, because you really do need precision if you're going in to tinker with a genetic strand. So when you think of people, when they picture a gene, they picture like a ladder that's twisted. I think it's called a twisted helix. Is that right? But anyway, what this technology allows scientists to do is rewrite genetic code. So I'm going to go in a little deeper, just a little bit deeper, but for no more than 60 seconds, because apart from that's all I've got in me, I also know one of CRISPR's pioneers listens to Stock Club. Hi, Jen. So, right, at its core, CRISPR relies on what's known as a guide RNA, or gnRNA, which is a direct enzyme. Okay, it's an enzyme. So typically this enzyme is known as a Cas9, and this goes to a specific DNA sequence. Think of this as a little heat-seeking missile. So this Cas9 is and goes straight into that little genetic ladder to find an element of it that needs to be replaced. Once the Cas9 heat seeker reaches, the enzyme reaches its target, it cuts the DNA like a little scissors. Bing! If you can imagine such a thing, I told you, look, you really got to stretch your mind to understand what's happening here. So this heat seeker goes into a genetic ladder, cuts the DNA, and it prompts the cell to repair the break. And during this repair processes, scientists introduce or delete or alter the genetic material, which basically means you can make precise changes in a DNA. And this has opened a door to revolutionary applications in medicine, agriculture, and research, which is no longer just space age. has been done. It has been achieved. It isn't whiteboards and white coats going, if we could do this. They've sent the heat seeker in and they've made changes in DNA.
That's amazing. And I loved your sound effects as well. I think for 2025, we should get one of those soundboards, for like the old school radios.
We don't even need one, Mike. I've got them all right here. And the thing is, we don't need AI for sound effects. You just, I can do it. You just need, I can even do a doorbell on occasion.
Yeah. So, Emmet, I'm going to ask for 2025. So, say CRISPR, the technology has been around for quite a while, and there's been a lot of public companies around for quite a while. I think you added, I don't know if this is a secret, but you added CRISPR Therapeutics to the Horizon Folio 3 years ago, maybe 2021. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So why do you think 2025 is going to be the standout year, or is it more so a personal thing where this is where you're focusing your attention to now?
No, it's far more than a personal thing, because like New Scientist, Nature magazine called this out as the most revolutionary technology in 2015. And here we are in 2025, 10 years later. But what Nature magazine every year has done is maintained it on the list as it's rising through the list of the most important and influential things that technology and science is bringing. And to the average, spud like me, it sounds unlikely, but to remind you, there's over 400 companies knee deep in this. This is the future. And it feels we're just at a tipping point, most especially because in 2024, CRISPR Therapeutics and other players started to cure real life problems like sickle cell anemia. And again, to quote Bill Mann from Motley when he was over for Horizon Live, he was telling us that his daughter is working on a project that's either sponsored or directed in some way by Michael J. Fox, where they're really close to identifying and stopping the gene that expresses Parkinson's. I mean, just think about that. Switching off Parkinson's. Please, I mean, how many people on this planet would do anything to just have that one solution to one of a million problems? It is just beyond belief. And at the moment, CRISPR is being used for treatments for genetic disorders, all types like muscular dystrophy, and it's showing major promise in cancer therapy, and modified immune cells are programmed to destroy tumors. In agriculture, it's enabling the creation of crops that are more resistant to pests and disease and climate and stress. And nutritional profiles of food. Wherever there is a cell, it can be improved. And beyond these applications, CRISPR is used to study gene functions, to model diseases, and accelerate scientific discovery. So to get to your question, I mean, when you kind of stick AI beside this technology, it's got such enormous potential. And it also has huge ethical concerns.
Big time.
Huge, absolutely. In fact, we spoke in the past about how AI has ethical concerns and how Europe is leading the charge on putting regulation on AI, which needs to be done. I think if you were to take very broad brushes, you could say America is leading the charge on AI development and Europe is leading the charge on its regulation. And both need to occur. And you can see which one is more creative and which one is more cautious. But the same concerns exist for CRISPR. I mean, there's so many challenges and risk of off-target effects that it's scary. Like the movie, what was the movie? I Am
Gattaca.
Legend.
Gattaca. Gattaca, where Ethan Hawke lives in a world where everybody's been genetically perfected, and he
I haven't seen that one.
Really? That's from the early 2000s. That's very good. That would be a good,
I'll stick that on watch list.
movie.
Well, I love the movie I Am Legend. The opening sequence. What's her name? Do you know the actress, the British actress, Emma Thompson? She's like this eminent scientist, and she's on TV they're saying, so how many people did you treat for this illness? 43,500, and 43,500 people had cancer. How many have you cured? 43,500. And then the screen just goes boom, and it shows New York as this barren landscape with weeds growing up out of the drains and it's quite haunting. And I can't but help, the more I've read on CRISPR, that scene keeps flashing back to mind, because there are so many potential unintended consequences when you alter a genome. Like I could go into a clinic and say, hey, I want all my hair back. and it could walk out looking like my auntie's cat. And but but there's so many profound ethical dilemmas, especially when you consider a human embryo, because I can walk into a clinic and go, give me my hair back, and sign a bunch of paperwork, which basically says if anything goes wrong, you've said it's okay. But, you know, uh, designer babies is not okay. You know, an unborn child obviously has no civil liberties. So you need ironclad protection, because if you went in and tweaked a female's gene, I presume by extension, you're going to tweak the genes even of her unborn child. So literally, it's mind bending the amount of regulation that needs to occur in the area. And the more you think about CRISPR, the further you slip into a rabbit hole. Like seriously, it's you can just choose any pocket of society. So your question to me was, what am I going to invest, or what am I targeting? Well, I'm going to read on this subject for a couple of hours a week, every single week. That's my New Year's resolution. I am going to become my own biggest expert, because I need to build my knowledge in a sequential way that I don't slip back to what is it again. And I'm going to read on it a couple of hours a week. I have a stack of books prepared, and I'll probably invest in a couple of players in the space, which of course Horizon subscribers will hear about, and hear about first and only hear about. CRISPR Therapeutics really is the OG, the original gangster in the space, because it's just a wonderful business. So as researchers, I'll shut up. I could go on about this, because you could have a full dedicated podcast on CRISPR. It's the lesser discussed. When you think about AI, is there, you can just see it, you can feel it, you can experience it. And, you know, you can say, right, beginner's pack for experiencing AI is going into Gemini or ChatGPT, and you'll immediately get a read on what's possible. It's not so readily available to get that read on CRISPR, but as we see this technology move through new variations, such as base editing with Cas12 and Cas13 systems, which are better heat-seeking missiles, its applications are going to expand far further than how we even understand life. And that, to me, seems like the greatest, what's the correct adjective? It is the most akin to black magic, or magic, or like I have ever heard of. It's almost hard to believe this technology has been discovered. And what's even more reassuring is that it has been used for such positive effect on people with sickle cell anemia, and how they are being cured of what heretofore was regarded as absolutely incurable. Like saying, cure my blue eyes. Most people go, that's not possible. You can't be cured of blue eyes. It's hardwired into your system. While sickle cell anemia was in that sphere, and now it's being cured. And I can tell you, there are going to be a handful of companies that are going to have 1,000-fold growth. But to find them is like literally going into a haystack and being told to find a peanut. So there you have it. That's what I'm going to do in the year ahead.
Okay, good stuff. Anne-Marie, follow that.
Quick question. Is that an alternative saying, a peanut in a haystack?
Well, I thought the reason I went with it as opposed to a needle was just simply because it's an organic thing, as opposed to a needle. I always thought if you're smart, you'll find a needle in a haystack.
But a needle kind of emulates
a piece of
hay, and a peanut is quite wide.
No, but do you know what the thing
Haystacks
is, right?
are quite big, no?
Haystacks are very big, yeah. But I was told a needle in a haystack is easy to find. You just need certain instrumentation. But that instrumentation, like the thermal properties of a needle, are completely different to the thermal properties.
I see what you're saying. You go into the haystack with a magnet. Makes it a lot easier.
A
magnet is, I mean, that's 101. A big magnet, just stick it over there. But that magnet will not work for a peanut. So yeah, hey, look, you can have a world. I've just made up a new expression.
It's also, they were both very kind of, for some reason I was thinking elephants. I was like, both peanuts and A, like elephants love that. It's very elephant brained.
What? Oh, you mean they'd eat the whole thing and the peanut wouldn't put them off?
No, I think she just called you Dumbo, Emmet, is what she's saying.
No.
Okay. Totally. Anne-Marie, you pitched your section as, what was it, 3 brands that got beaten up?
In the bin.
In the 3 brands in the bin. That was it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, that's a good setup, because I think I like this kind of
Yeah, I like this
focused
one now. I've
approach.
actually, I really hope I haven't switched off our listeners. If there's anyone left, thank you so much.
Yeah, I was thinking like, wow, after that incredibly detailed technical analysis, let's talk about shoes. Like, um,
I'm on for it. I'm actually, it's refreshing.
Yeah.
yeah. So with my three big brands that I want to talk about are Nike, Disney, and Starbucks, both massive international conglomerates, been around forever. All three stocks are absolutely in the toilet. Most of them are approaching, if not already at, like a 5-year low. PDEs are quite low. And to be fair, they're low because they're all three having business difficulties. But I do think they're pretty interesting opportunities at the minute. So I went and dug into each and I basically ranked them because I was
Oh,
like,
great.
who would be my priority here if I could only pick one? But all three have an interesting narrative going on. And I think they're all kind of worth keeping a little eye on in the coming year, especially because, as we've talked about, the S&P is very high at the minute. The S&P is being fueled by basically all the big tech companies. We're beginning to see the rest of the tech market warming up. But I do think it would be interesting to get, one or two non-tech names in if you're, building an annual portfolio or that kind of thing. And particularly with these brands being so large, having such significant recognition, and being able to get them in at a cheap price is probably a nice little bonus as well. So I'm going to talk about them in order of preference, just based upon kind of, I went and had a looked at the management, looked at kind of the prospectus for the next 12 months and who I think has the best opportunity to have a great 2025. And so number one I want to talk about is Nike, which actually me and Mike dug into maybe 2 or 3 months ago, just kind of on the back of they delivered that quarter where revenue dropped about 8%. And that was really, I think, when the market went, oh, this is new territory for Nike. They're usually pretty consistent with some single digit, occasionally around a Christmas, a double digit revenue growth. So to see that, I think really kind of sent a shiver down everybody's spine. It's been such a consistent performer for, 10 or 15 years here. And so today now Nike sits with a market cap about 114 billion. They're still going to bring in about 40 to 50 billion in revenue every year. They plan to do about 4 billion in terms of buybacks, and they deliver 2 billion worth of dividends every year. So there's still a pretty healthy profile there, currently trading about 23 price to earnings, which is like a 7-year low or something like
It's
that. So there's definitely a buying
well
opportunity if
below the
it's a
market
company you
multiple
like.
as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely underperforming like all the new age companies, definitely like Hoka and On Running, but it's also even underperforming Under Armour, which is like Nike's stinky little cousin.
Yeah.
So like, there's definitely an opportunity if you like Nike to take a look at the stock. But there were 4 big issues that we recognized a couple months ago for why Nike is struggling so much. Number one, and probably the most glaring, is the fact that they went all in direct to consumer in 2020. And at the time, that was very fair enough because nobody can shop in person. But we've kind of discovered through that process that when it comes to shoes in particular, sometimes people want to shop in person because they want to be able to try a bunch of stuff on and be like, yeah, this one fits me the best or this is most comfortable. Consequently, in that direct to consumer push, Nike cut off a lot of relationships with wholesalers. And now they're going crawling back, unfortunately. But they have begun rebuilding that over the last year. So it's interesting to see some moves there. Number two was that they weren't picking up on trends fast enough. They kind of seemed to sit back a little bit and rely upon the old reliables. They were putting out a lot of Air Force Ones. They were producing a lot of Jordan retro shoes that had been very popular in the early 2000s. And obviously they make a lot of money on Jordans because they have a really high price tag. But Nike's OG area is running, and they really weren't innovating in that space, which was allowing companies like Hoka to really, really encroach on the space. And I think that would have been inconceivable for Nike 5 years ago. So they have to kind of return to that innovative space. They need to be fueling their research department. And number three, which I thought was so interesting, was the fact that apparently Nike had been moving away from their narrative-based marketing, which for so long I think was like the bread and butter of Nike. That's what I really associate with them. Those commercials that kind of come out of nowhere and really make you step back and go, ooh, wow, that was cool. And they always feature LeBron James or Serena Williams or something like that. And you're like, yeah, they really are legends. They really are a breed of their own. They really are different from the rest of us. And so Nike has begun to reboot that capability. We saw a significant advertising push for the Paris Olympics, and they discussed that on their most recent call. What did they say here? They said, thanks to the campaign, Nike owned over 60% of total share of voice during the Olympic Games within the United States market, resonating especially deep with our athletes and with Gen Z consumers. So already returning to that narrative-based advertisement is beginning to see movement in a market and in an area that you would like to see. On the kind of wholesaler stuff, we have not, unfortunately, we're using our third eye. We're looking into the future. When we're recording this, Nike has an earnings call next week. So I'm either going to look really smart or really dumb.
I didn't
sorry.
factor in that. I thought we were outside of earnings season.
No, so they have earnings next week. So, however, it's not earnings for the Christmas season. And I actually do think the Christmas season is going to be the most important one for us to look to for Nike, because obviously it's a retailer. But DSW, which is a big wholesale shoe company in the United States. They have these like massive warehouse size shoe stores. They reestablished their relationship with Nike a year ago. Nike left DSW in 2021, and they have already had their earnings call. And on it, they said, we continue to be very pleased with the Nike performance. They couldn't be better partners. We're really encouraged. We couldn't be more pleased with the business and our relationship with them. So I thought that was kind of a good sign. They called Nike out in particular. And before 2021, Nike represented about 4% of DSW's revenue. So to see them come back in and to say already within the first year, DSW's like, yep, we're super happy with this. Obviously, like everything is an advantage to DSW. More money is more money. But I do think that's a nice little green light to see a wholesaler kind of sign off and be like, yes, we are happy with this relationship. So we should see more wholesalers come forward with that. At the minute, a big one is going to be Foot Locker, which Foot Locker is almost entirely dependent on Nike for sales. So we are beginning to see movement and warming in those areas that we'd like. And probably the biggest one for me, which just forced me to put Nike at the top, is when me and Mike did our episode a couple months ago about Nike. At the end, we had a conversation, which was, would you buy Nike today, right now? And Mike was like already on board. And he was like, yeah,
I think I had already bought shares, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I do still own.
Yep, there you go. And I had one caveat. And do you remember what the caveat was?
CEO.
Yeah, it was that the CEO who had put in all these changes, the direct to consumer, who had cut the marketing budget, the guy who'd cut the innovation and research department, the guy who did that was John Donahoe. It's Hoe. I thought it was Donahue when we recorded that episode. But anyway, it's Donahoe.
Donahue in Ireland, but it wouldn't pronounce
that
in America.
But I then heard him pronounce it in an interview, and I was like, well, said that wrong 65 times in an episode. But anyway,
maybe you said it wrong. Don't so hard
like,
yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, do you remember when we were talking about Abercrombie and you made a compilation of how many times Emmet mispronounced it?
Yeah, I made a supercut of because every
Abercrombie.
You made Abercrombie.
A-B-E-R.
Abercrombie.
What? Say it again.
Abercrombie.
Oh, Abercrombie. Why didn't you tell me? I feel my face go red.
You're flowing.
I've been saying that for 10 years.
I didn't know you 10 years ago.
You know how many times I talk about Abercrombie and Fitch every day? Lots.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, he was the CEO. He came in 2018 and he basically initiated all of these changes. And the reason he did it is he came from consulting and tech. So he's really obsessed with quantitative metrics. He likes to measure everything. He's obsessed with growth. And so he was the one who pushed into direct to consumer. He was really focused on profitability. And I wasn't interested in Nike 2 months ago because he was still the CEO. And then like 10 days after we put that episode out, it was announced Nike was replacing the CEO. And the guy that they have brought in, his name is Kevin. What's Kevin's last name? It's in the notes somewhere.
Anywho.
Yeah, we would hope. Anyway, the new CEO who's coming in, he's like bread and butter Nike. He started it at Nike as an intern and has been at Nike for like 30 years.
That's good.
And I was like, yes, This is the absolute perfect pick for Nike, because so many of their problems seem to come from the fact that the management didn't really understand the core of the business. And so I really love the new CEO. I'm very interested to see what 2025 holds. And I do think it's the way it's priced right now, I do think it's a very interesting opportunity. So Nike, number one out the gate in terms of retail stocks for 2025. Number two, we're going to go with Disney.
Interesting, right? Yeah.
And Disney has...
talking about leadership there with Nike. Elliot Hill, I think is his name. Is that right?
For
Nike.
Is his name Elliot? No.
I don't know who Kevin is.
After so heavily endorsing the name Kevin. Hopefully I write about CEOs on all three of these stocks, so hopefully Kevin comes up here somewhere. Anyway, new Nike CEO, I like. He's of the company. Yeah. I think that's smart for a brand like Nike, where like brand and history and legacy are so important. I think you want somebody who's come from that as well. So moving on to Disney. Disney also has a couple of major big red flag problems that have been brewing for the last couple of years. Again, going back to 2020 and the pandemic. Number one, out the gate, overspending on Disney Plus, lack of profitability. Yeah. That seems to be a huge issue for people. Beginning of 2023, we had two big activist investor groups come in. They were trying to shake things up. We had the whole issue with Peltz, where he was fighting. He was trying to get a board seat. That was a whole big thing. He kept calling people on the phone. It was, it wasn't the best. And then they forced out Bob Chapek, who he was CEO in 2022, and they had to call up Bob Iger and be like, please come back. Oh my God, we don't know what we've done. Never a great look to go crawling back to your retired CEO. We're going to talk about that with Starbucks as well.
I think Bob Iger has a bit to answer for, because he initiated the Disney Plus
He did.
spend-a-thon, retired, left
Yep.
Bob Chapek a steaming pile of
Yeah.
whatever.
Wrote his autobiography just to make sure the
Yeah.
best. It was pinnacle
Yeah.
autobiography.
And
Yeah.
then kind of came back and like said it was all that guy's fault, but I'm here to fix it. Hasn't really done much.
Yeah.
And is, I don't know, there's an ego there that it just seems a bit concerning to Disney as a whole, because
Yeah.
didn't he give sorry, I'm talking across probably what you've in your
No.
notes, but didn't he give big 2026 guidance when he's going to be gone again or something like that recently?
Yeah, so the board has already said that Iger will be gone by 2026, so they need to put a leadership transition plan in place.
Yeah.
As well as that, Iger so rides the wave of he cut the Marvel deal and he cut the Star Wars deal. And so
I mean, if I did, I would be too.
Yeah,
Well,
like
not small
that's what's fueled Disney for the last 10 years. Like since those deals have gone through, it has done nothing but make money for the company. So fair enough. Like that's his thing. So I think he's a big IP guy. He does that thing where he's like, you want a recognizable brand and you bleed that asset dry, like you guys have talked about in the past in terms of Marvel. But yeah, so now the Bob Iger issue it's a benefit he's back, but it's obviously an issue now because he needs to be replaced by the end of 2025. So that's an issue on everybody's mind, who's going to take his place. Because again, Disney is a business where it is advantageous to have somebody who's been in there for decades so they actually know how things work. And then the content map for Disney right now is a bit muddled. And I was talking to Emmet about it at the beginning of the week, and the Star Wars and the Marvel project seem to be losing a bit of steam. There's a bit of public apathy, I think, towards that because there's so much of it on Disney Plus, and there's been so much of it in the theaters in the last 10 years. And I think people are kind of like, whoa. And so the alternative to that is Disney's gone really into like the sequels and the live action remakes, which always seem to make money even when they're horrible. Like the Aladdin remake made over $1 billion and it's bar unwatchable. Don't know what happened
Is Will
there.
Smith in that?
Will Smith
Yeah,
is
he's a genie.
It probably did really well in India, I'd say.
Yeah, but the CGI tiger was just so bad.
No, I'm
like,
not,
guys.
I'm not disagreeing with you on like quality, but there's tactics behind everything Disney does, even with the remakes. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like they make money, but it's just like at what cost? Because are you then diluting the original assets that you used to make that with?
Yeah,
I mean, you don't want to dirty the Aladdin franchise. That's just you can't have that.
Yeah, and so I'm interested now coming into end of 2024, early 2025. We have the Mufasa movie coming out, which is a live action prequel to The Lion King.
Oh yeah.
So that'll be coming out. So it'll be interesting to see how that does because we're already getting weird vibes because the director was already like didn't like working in that format, wouldn't do it again. That's not a great test.
Yeah.
And then we have the Thunderbolts, which is kind of a Marvel movie. We haven't had a Marvel movie in a while. That one is coming to theaters also in 2025. So those will be key to kind of see where the content is going. But again, Disney has a couple of early signs of life that don't like completely turn me off the stock. In its last quarter, it did achieve operating income profitability within the streaming segment, generated positive operating income of 0.3 billion, which, you know, that's flipping around something that for the last several years has been a massive loss maker.
Yeah.
And that was achieved through just consistent sub growth, particularly in the United States market, and then being able to pull off an annual price increase. So obviously for people who have this subscription, you can get an extra $1 or $2 out of them. They're probably going to go down that Netflix avenue within the next year of blocking password sharing and trying to get people to pay for additional membership. So, you know, that could work there. They also have announced that they will be returning more cash to shareholders over the next year. They will be increasing the dividends. They paused the dividends a while back in 2020, and that became a big issue because for a really long time, I think a lot of people just thought of Disney as like such a solid little dividend stock. Buy it for your kids, hold on to it for 50 years, kind of forget about it. So to have the dividend come back, I think is an important reminder to our investors of like, yes, we are this company that will last 100 years. Don't worry about us. I think that the return to excellence is probably going to be a little bit slower than it is for Nike. I think some of the issues here are a bit more systemic. But I think this is something that maybe Disney has pulled off before, which is another point that I talked to Emmet about this week, which was this period of Disney in terms of content production really reminds me of the late 90s and early 2000s when Disney went through that period of putting out a lot of direct-to-home video sequels of original movies that had been very famous. So we got like The Lion King 2, The Lion King 1.5, Cinderella 2, Mulan 2, Aladdin 2, and they just were produced for very little money because the way that Disney did that is they created a secondary animation studio that was just focused on home market. And then they would just produce these movies very cheaply and then sell hundreds of thousands of VHS copies and make a bunch of money by skipping the theaters because it didn't have to do a revenue split. And that's really what Disney Plus sometimes reminds me of, hey, we have all of this legacy IP, pump out whatever we want about that legacy IP, sell it direct to consumers, make money that way, skip the theaters. And that strategy made the money in the early 90s. And then heading into the 2000s, it began to have the effect of like they weren't super focused on the big tentpole films that they have to be producing in order to say in 25 years, they need to be able to look back and be like, this is the legacy IP that we created in 2025. And so that is my kind of concern that I'm looking at. And interestingly, in 2000, the big sequel initiative was pushed by Michael Eisner, who was the CEO at the time, and he was really pushed out for that and for trying to expand the Disney parks in a way that, again, wasn't kind of consistent with the Disney brand. And what's interesting is when I read up on Michael Eisner, there was a quote from Walt Disney, who, when Walt Disney was still in charge of Disney, he had a strict no sequels policy because one of his
He had a
earliest
bunch of
films,
strict no something policies, that fella.
yes,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
that's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
But he had this very strict no sequels policy because early in the Disney days, he made a movie called Three Little Pigs, and then he tried, and it did really well. And then he tried
Yeah.
to make a sequel for it, and it bombed. And so then he had a famous quote that said, "You can't top pigs with pigs." So he was just like, it's more beneficial for us to make an incredible story and just leave it as it is. And so while he was still in charge of the company, they never made any sequels. And then Eisner came in and was kind of like sequel, sequel, sequel,
Yeah.
sequel. And that's kind of where they are right now. And so I'm hoping that this is a policy that will be reversed because I think it's very important, again, for that long-term investment thesis. About 2 years ago, we heard that Pixar's budget was being cut and they were being told to focus more on sequels than to focus on original content, which is a shame
It
because
is a shame, yeah.
think of how many key brand assets for Disney have come out of just original movies
Terrible.
that were written by the people at Pixar. Like Toy Story is such a
Yeah.
moneymaker, and
Yeah.
that was an original story conceived by that group. So that I'm kind of looking for green shoots there. I want to see some more original content. I'll be looking at the slate coming up for 2025, but you can already kind of see the wheel turning. Again, you need to be keeping an eye on the new CEO and what that's going to look like because that's going to impact the stock price going into 2026. But I still think Disney outranks Starbucks, but is going to sit below Nike in terms of these three big brands. And that takes us finally into Starbucks. Stock price is almost at a 5-year low. PE is sitting at 29, which is comparatively low over the last 7 or 8 years. Again, Starbucks having this massive identity crisis. It lost its coffee house vibe, got caught up in union problems. It's being struck by political boycotts at the minute because it was very focused on the rewards program and the online drinks order. It's kind of like ruined the vibe inside. Like people don't really go to Starbucks to sit and hang out anymore. It's just like pick up your drink, leave, never come back. A lot of the expansion in the last 5 years has been driven by drive-throughs. And so it's kind of, for years, I think the Starbucks brand was really like jazz music, Sharpie on cups, sit, loiter, use free Wi-Fi. And that has kind of gone away. And that seems to be what people are, particularly in the American market, that seems to be what people are missing. On top of that, Starbucks, for years and years and years, the growth story has been, hey, pay a massive multiple because we're moving into China. And that China growth story has slowed down. I do think that's a financial thing, but I also think it's a cultural thing. I think more broadly, we're beginning to see resistance from the Chinese population to American brands. I think in the past, they were like so delighted to embrace them. Like we saw that with Apple. But now I think for political reasons and probably cultural reasons are starting to go, like, maybe we can make coffee houses within our own country. And so that's a big systemic issue that they're going to be talking about. But the big short-term headwind for 2025 that if you're interested in Starbucks, you have to keep an eye on is the fact that coffee prices are sky high at the minute. So Starbucks is a big buyer of green coffee beans. It actually buys about 3.3% of the entire global supply. And as of the 29th of November, 2024, coffee prices hit a 47-year high of $3.35 a pound. And that was because key producers, Brazil and Vietnam, have been having issues in terms of drought and excess rain. So in view of this supply disruption, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has adjusted down its forecast on Brazil's production by 5% for 2025, and consequently, it's going to push up prices substantially. Apparently, Starbucks has been kind of waiting to buy large amounts of its coffee stock in the hopes that the prices come back down. But that doesn't seem to look like it's going to happen. So then Starbucks is going to have this crunch in its profitability. And ideally, to fix that, they'll raise prices. But they've been raising prices a lot in the last 4 years because of inflation. So they're going to get stuck, unfortunately, in this pincher move. So while I think the brand is currently undervalued for what we know is the Starbucks legacy, I just think there's too many short-term headwinds. I think the union thing is going to rear its head again. We're not fully out of this kind of political boycott. We don't know what the long-term aspects of that are going to be. And so it's going to make it into the bottom of the list, but I still think I want to keep a wary eye on it, but I don't think I would be investing in it this year. On top of that, in terms of its green shoots, it does have that new CEO coming in. It had the same issue with Disney. It pushed out Brian Johnson in 2022. It went back to Howard Schultz and said, please, God, please come back. Oh my gosh. He did come back. And now in September of 2024, he was replaced by Brian Niccol, who's
There's
famously the CEO of Chipotle.
and you're Brian. You were missing earlier.
No, it was Kevin. I don't know
Sorry, I
who
don't know
Kevin
who
is.
Kevin is. Never mind.
There's CEO Kevin somewhere.
Yeah.
But Brian Niccol, who saved Chipotle, to be fair, in 2015, and they had a lot of
Oh,
short-term
yeah.
headwinds when that happened.
Yeah, they
So
did.
he's definitely the CEO to do it.
Yeah.
But it's
He
a
might be
sticky
coming
12
in
months.
regretting his decision now. Coffee comes at all-time highs the second he starts.
I know. And he's also commuting via plane, which I know is not like the biggest issue that we should be focused on, but it does just seem like the most ridiculous expense.
Yeah.
Like our CEO is going to commute by plane from California to Seattle.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I remember
come
reading that.
on. Like,
Yeah.
just like lay your foot down. But anyway, those are my the three big brands in the bin for 2025. Those are my rankings. We're going to go Nike, Disney, Starbucks. Nike's definitely the most preferential. But the interesting theme that you kind of see with all three of them is they seem like stocks and businesses who in 2020, when the market was hot and when everybody was a bit panicky because of stay-at-home orders, they all seemed to make this weird pivot where they tried to become tech companies and they tried to be like, yep, we can get 25% revenue growth quarter over quarter. Don't you worry. We're going to have technical innovation. We're not going to have any of these worries that we should have, even though we're a retailer or even though we make movies. And that seemed to work for a couple of years. And now we're having the realization of like, whoa, some businesses are just supposed to work a little bit slower. Like Disney's production timeline is meant to be a little bit slower and more considerate. Starbucks' stores are meant to be a little bit slower and more considerate. Nike's marketing spend is going to end up being higher and more considerate because that's just the brand that they have built. They are going to spend a lot of money on research and design because they're a sportswear company and that's how it is. You can't be sitting and comparing them to Microsoft or Apple. And I think the market tended to do that in 2020. So the businesses reacted accordingly. And I think now that you reap what you sow, and so this is the rebuilding period for all three.
Well done, Anne-Marie. So here's a question to the three of us. If you could
Yeah.
only buy one of those three brands and hold for 50 years, it's a stock that you're going to give your grandchildren, but you're not allowed to buy anything else. Which one would you choose? Nike, Disney, Starbucks? Mike, you go first.
Yeah, it's going to be Nike for me because I already own shares. So that's an easy decision.
Okay. Anne-Marie?
50 years is tough. I feel like, God, it's between Nike and Disney. I think Disney, if we're going 50 full years. I think
And same here. I'd go with Disney as well because Starbucks has an awful lot of local pressures. I think Nike has an awful lot of, as you said at the top of your piece, on holdings and what are the other ones called? Hoka, yeah. And I think they're going to see more of that. And I think Disney just is the kingpin of family entertainment and will always be. So I think they need to put creativity back at the core as opposed to just regurgitating the old stuff. But anyway.
Yeah.
Mike, what have you got for us? 2025. Talk to us.
I went so boring, I'm afraid, but I'll try to keep it short.
Paper mills.
No, it's just the same thing we've been talking about for the last 10 years, which is the Magnificent Seven: Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Tesla, and Nvidia. They're the most important stocks in the market by far. They make up about 33%. They make up about a third of the S&P, more or less, and responsible for about half of the S&P's gains in 2024. Their average valuation is around 40 times earnings. Obviously, there's some variance here. Tesla is at about 100 times earnings, while Google is down at about 20. But as a whole, they're an expensive group of stocks. They're also probably the highest quality businesses, maybe ever. Do you know what I mean? To be able to grow at this level for this long and at that scale, that like where we're getting to $1 trillion businesses growing at 20-30% a year. I don't know if I've ever seen something like that before. So it's a weird situation where there's obvious concern about how concentrated the market is at the top, but also that these businesses, I think I think I can't remember, was it Microsoft, Google, and Amazon? I think were the three that their gains from this year actually came from earnings growth rather than valuation growth. Their valuations went down while their earnings went up, which you don't really see in a market this heady. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the big concern, I think, for this cohort of stocks for next year is going to come around AI spending. Nvidia is
Mm, no
But
doubt.
Nvidia is in the middle of this, but also a bit set aside from this, just because it's actually the recipient of all this capital expenditure from the rest of them. But especially Apple seems a small bit like it's boxing a bit more clever. But Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they've all set out huge capital expenditure plans for these AI supercomputers. And it's what we were talking about in our review of 2024. Emmet, you were quoting Eric Schmidt from Google, and it's this fear of
Yeah.
getting left behind from this technology now. And
Yeah. That's right.
these CEOs are acutely aware of it. And so because they have the resources as well, why not? So they're spending billions and billions and billions, and fully intend to spend billions and billions to stay ahead of this race. And now this is fine when the market's going up. But what happens if we see a sentiment shift, maybe a slowdown like in 2022, and investors start to zero in on the bottom line? Do you remember Facebook got absolutely decimated with its metaverse plans? I think it was going to
Yeah.
plan to spend 10 billion a year on the metaverse, and the stock got to a point. I think it was trading for less than 10 times cash flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just
And
got
it
absolutely thrown out.
pushed and it pushed up a bunch of big tech companies that didn't go into the metaverse. I remember Google was so celebrated at the time because they were like, they didn't chase into the metaverse, and look at how silly Meta looks now, and look at how good Google looks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
So my concern for these businesses, because they're so important for the overall market, is what would happen if investors get sick of watching them spend billions and billions on AI projects without much ROI coming out of the back end. And then that feeds into what would happen to Nvidia if they get scrutinized for their spend. So that's the biggest concern I would see for the Magnificent Seven. But
mm,
because they have the resources, it's a weird spot. They're making so much money from everywhere else. You know what I mean? Their cloud platforms are growing at 40-50% a year, and they're nearly $1 trillion business alone. And I don't know. There's a bit of leeway given, I suppose. AI isn't making any
mm,
money yet on the consumer side of things, but
mm,
there's just that desperate rush not to fall behind. And if these are the CEOs that are able to say, yeah, look, we're gonna bite the bullet for a while and spend here just because we're not letting this technology get ahead of us. That's maybe like it all depends on market sentiment. So yeah, I don't know. After the last 2 years in the market, I mentioned at the start, the resurgence of kind of story stocks, crypto, meme coins, option tradings, it all feels a bit frothy. Like I was reading it up there, $140 billion was pumped into the market the month after Donald Trump's election. It made November was the busiest month of inflows for US equities since 2000. Dwarfs,
wow. I
dwarfs,
didn't know that.
dwarfs anything we
Oh,
saw in 2021 when we got very bumpy there as well. So
Don't love that.
yeah, it's a weird spot. Like valuations are as high as they are, growth is elevated so much, especially because Trump has basically said he's going to really build these companies in the stock market up. Emmett, you talked about his maybe obsession with the S&P 500 and its scoreboard. So I don't know. These stocks have had such momentum behind them. Every earnings season
mm.
in 2025 is going to be, if you don't deliver, I believe there'll be big sell-offs. Maybe not, but I'm not sure. So
Mm.
yeah,
You got to think so. I would agree with you. I mean, like those seven businesses have had such dominance in their respective fields, and I don't have the study to hand, but I think when you look at the top 10 companies by market cap in any one generation, very rarely
are
do they
they
survive
the
until the
next
next
10 years or
generation.
the next 10 years? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen that
So,
before
like,
as
if
well.
we, yeah, like ExxonMobil and all this kind of stuff. And when you go back to only 20 years ago, it feels like you've gone back to the days of button boots, because those brands have absolutely diminished from, I suppose, the world's consciousness and their dominant position. So there are up and coming things, businesses now that surely are going to topple these off.
Yeah.
Um,
People would look at
but
OpenAI as kind of maybe the start of that, because it's a new technology that maybe these companies weren't behind in, we'll say, but it's the first threat, maybe, you know?
yeah. So of the 7, let's play the game again. So Apple,
Mm.
Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Tesla, and Nvidia. The
Well,
Magnificent Seven.
I'm gonna do this because I have a bit prepped
Oh,
for
good. Okay,
I have a
do it.
bit prepped for Amazon in particular, because there was a
Oh, yeah. Let's
weird
hear it.
Yeah.
there was a weird anomaly going on throughout
Mm,
2024, basically. So Andy Jassy took over in July of 2021. Basically, over the next year and a half, the stock fell about 50%, along with every other tech stock on the market. Not particularly an Andy Jassy problem, but he was definitely feeling the heat. And then in the 2 years since after that,
mm,
it obviously came back up along with every other tech market on the market as well. But there was one thorn in his side throughout 2024, which is actually really interesting, which was Bezos. He reported this. It's called a 10b5-1 plan with the SEC, where he said, "I'm going to sell 25 million shares of Amazon by the end of 2025." I think they have to report it so it's not seen as like insider trading, basically. But multiple times throughout the year, anytime Amazon hit $200 or more, Bezos would start
Mm.
selling. So it essentially put this like artificial ceiling on Amazon's stock price. I think in July, after its earnings report, it like kept hitting up against $200, and because Bezos was selling billions, it would never surpass it. It happened again at the start of November, and then Bezos came out and said, "I'm successfully sold all 25 million shares," which was it was a bit more than 5 billion quid in the end.
Oh,
Um,
that's nice.
and since that came out, and obviously there's a load of momentum behind the Trump election as well, the stock has gone way past. It's up at well past 200 anyways. I don't want to give any direct figures. So I thought that was really interesting because it's nothing to do
mm.
with the business performance. It's just this weird kind of anomaly, because I don't know how many Bezos has still $200 billion worth of Amazon stock. He's obviously freeing up cash for whatever else he wants to do. Maybe the rocket company,
Blue Origin.
Blue Origin,
His super yacht.
or more super yachts, or more steroids, or whatever. But there was just that thing where like the stock was probably underperforming its metrics just because of this one factor that had nothing to do with the
Yeah.
operations of the business. So that was an interesting thing. He already came out as well and said he's spending 95% of his time with Amazon now as well,
Mm.
just because he's so engaged with the AI initiatives. They don't fully own Anthropic, do they? It's kind of like an OpenAI Microsoft deal.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
as far
Yeah.
as I understand.
Strategic collaboration or whatever. But he's become so much more engaged with the company again now as well. So it's an interesting factor where maybe we've been looking at a Bezos less Amazon since 2021, and it doesn't seem to be the case going into 2025. So that's the argument for
Yeah.
Amazon out of the 7, anyways.
Oh, interesting. It's a good. I mean, you look at it. It's very hard to argue in any of them. If you go for, I would have chosen Tesla because of robots and AI and FSD and the fact that so many other motor manufacturers pulling out of the game, etc. But I mean, you could put a compelling argument down for any of them.
Mm.
Who could argue against Apple?
Or would you see
Seriously, it's
this
crazy.
Google quantum computing crack?
Oh my goodness, that's an absolute face melter. I was only reading about it last night, and I actually have the stats here. So they have a new chip. They were saying it's a mind-boggling quantum chip, the most powerful yet. It's 1.5 inches, a little larger than an After Eight Mint, and it takes the chip.
That's direct quote from Sundar Pichai.
the chip, the chip takes 5 minutes to complete tasks that would take conventional computers 10 septillion years, which is 10 followed by 24 zeros, which is more time than the history of the universe. So yeah, it is there. There's yeah, it's pretty quick. It actually it might accommodate the number of orders that go from our house to Amazon. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, it is pretty amazing, and yeah, we're gonna have even faster computers. Isn't that great?
And me and you, Anne-Marie, we talked about Google as well. Probably
Yeah.
going to be a less hawkish SEC, DOJ kind of oversight environment
Yeah.
under Trump as well.
Yeah, the concern there is just like the search is. We know that they've made changes to the search algorithm, and people seem to be a little bit upset. You don't want to alienate people too much because that's so important for the ads, like, and for just generating revenue. So that would be my one caution with Google at the minute. That was funny. Again, me and Emmet talked about that this week, where we were watching YouTube and we were saying, "Wow, if they like somehow force Chrome out of Google, we were like, this is what the business will be, YouTube, and how many ads they can fit every 2.5 minutes." Like, so, I actually don't know what of the 7 I would like. So I'm always kind of partial to Apple, but even Apple at the minute, like, they've hit such hardware saturation, and they haven't had anything kind of that eye catching for me in the last year. I mean, obviously the Vision Pro is interesting, but the market for it just doesn't seem to be there. It's
It's
very
gone.
expensive.
They've retired it.
It has been retired fully.
I think
Okay.
so, yeah. I'm 90% sure that they've decided very quietly put that away now and will never speak of it again.
Yeah, and so I'm always, because the thing for Apple is always they have an innovation that rolls out. I think about the headphones. Everyone was like, "Oh, everybody already has an iPhone. They don't make enough money." And then the headphones, the AirPods rolled out, and they made so
Yeah.
much money off the
Yes.
accessories. And then the Apple
Amazing.
Watch, and they made so much money off that. And so I'm waiting for what that next little thing will be, because that is how they fuel their growth. They obviously know they're going to sell a certain number of iPads and iPhones and computers a year, but yeah, I haven't seen the
They've run out of
latest.
ideas, basically.
I mean, yeah, but you never know. See, as we have previously said with Apple, they are a company that moves in silence. So something could pop up next year and we would
Yeah.
go, whoa.
They pulled out of the car market, which I thought was a pity. I know
Mm.
there was some like 6,000 secret workers displaced back into the organization. It was interesting and exciting, I thought, to hear of an Apple designed car for a business that has so long paraded as like the design, like
Yeah.
post-industrial design experts.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to that. So that's gone. Yeah, I can't even think of something. I'll write to I'll write to Tim Cook
Steve
if
Jobs.
You
You
can,
write a letter and
Whoops.
burn it in a
you can
fire.
write to him. I don't think he's going to reply.
Yeah, exactly.
Skywriting.
Neither will Tim, but anyway, if I
Yeah.
think of something, I'll send it to him.
Okay.
Right.
All right. We've gone over an hour. That's the first time in a while I think we've done that with this pod.
We'll keep going till 2026. Let's keep going. We can do this.
Real quick, I did figure out why I thought a CEO's name was Kevin. And
Wow.
that is because Elliot Hill from Nike looks like Kevin McCarthy from the House of Representatives. And so in my brain,
Wow.
I encoded that information being like, that guy's name is probably Kevin
How
too.
many Irish people went, oh yeah, no, none, zero.
Yeah, there is a face type for Kevin's. Do you know what I mean? Like, you look at somebody, you'd be like, his name's probably Kevin.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Elliot Hill, the new CEO of Nike, he has Kevin face.
Yeah.
Sorry, Elliot Hill.
That's a big
My
insult.
dad's
Anyway.
a Kevin. My father is Kevin, and he does look like a Kevin, but I think I'm used to calling him Kevin. Well, call him Dad, but you know.
I'm used to calling
I think
you always call him Kevin.
Kevins are looked down on in France for some reason. It's like
Are they now?
Yeah, it's like a
Right.
name
I'll
for
be telling my Kevin about that.
I don't know.
Do you know what? Good. They need to be brought down a peg. There's too many Kevins in
High
Ireland.
and mighty.
Okay. Before we get too distracted, I'm going to finish the show there. Anne-Marie and Emmet, thank you for kicking off 2025 on a high note, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next week.